Abort! A starving peasant's child has no place in this world, and if you decide to have that baby, I will destroy you," said the millionaire's wife, throwing money at the peasant. 5 years later, the peasant decided to get revenge, and the witchy millionaire turned pale upon seeing that. The sun began to set over the fields, staining the horizon with golden and orange hues. Lucia, kneeling in the dirt, was weeding a small garden she had started next to the house where she had lived alone for several years. Each leaf pulled, each sprout plucked, was a way to release the tension built up inside her. With hands covered in dirt, she felt the weight of everyday life on her chest, the loneliness that had become her constant shadow. As she worked, her mind couldn't help but wander. The same questions circled her head over and over. Is this all that life has in store for me? This monotony, this daily struggle to survive? The chirping of birds in the distance barely managed to soothe her thoughts. She was so absorbed in her worries that she didn't hear the sound of the car slowly approaching on the dirt road. A soft honk brought her out of her reverie. Lifting her eyes, there he was, Hector, the man she only knew from a distance, but whose name resonated throughout the town. Hector Carrasco, the wealthiest farmer in the region, with lands that stretched as far as the eye could see. Tall, with a face weathered by the sun and rough hands, but with an imposing presence. He wore simple clothes, though of good quality, and his gaze always seemed to hide something more, something Lucia had never been able to decipher. Lucia stood up with difficulty, wiping her hands on her apron as Hector approached her with a tilted smile. "Lucia, right?" he said, stopping a couple of meters from her. Lucia nodded, feeling a mix of discomfort and curiosity. Why was he here? They had never exchanged more than a couple of words in the past. "Yes, I'm Lucia." Her voice sounded weaker than she expected, but Hector's presence intimidated her. She had heard so many stories about him, but never imagined he would seek her out. Hector looked at her for a moment, as if he were evaluating her, before taking a step closer. "I've seen you working around here. You're a hardworking woman, that's clear." Hector paused, as if considering his next words. "I was thinking, would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" Lucia blinked, surprised. It wasn't the kind of invitation she expected, much less from someone like him. Her first instinct was to say no. What could a man like Hector want from me? She thought. But another part of her, the part that dreamed of something more, of a different life, couldn't help but feel a twinge of hope. "Dinner?" repeated Lucia, puzzled, searching Hector's eyes for some explanation. He nodded, with a smile trying to be reassuring. "Yes, dinner. Just the two of us. I thought we could get to know each other better. This town is small, and I think there are many things we don't know about each other." Lucia hesitated, but the temptation to escape, even if just for a few hours, from the lonely life she led, made her nod. "All right," she said finally, with a slight tremor in her voice. "I'll see you tonight." Hours later, Lucia stood in front of the mirror in her small house, adjusting the prettiest dress she had, though it was still modest. She couldn't believe she was going out with Hector Carrasco, the man she had heard so much about in the town. Her hands trembled as she tried to style her hair, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't calm down. What was she doing? What could a man like Hector see in her? Her thoughts tormented her when she heard a car stop in front of her house. She looked out the window, and there was Hector, leaning against his car, looking at her with that same confident smile. Lucia felt her heart beat faster, but she took a deep breath and stepped out of the house, determined to face whatever came next. The drive to the restaurant was relatively quiet. Hector drove calmly, and although he made some casual comments, Lucia couldn't help feeling out of place. Upon arriving at the restaurant, one of the most elegant in the city, Lucia felt even more uncomfortable. It was a place she would never have gone on her own, but Hector, as if reading her discomfort, gently took her arm as they entered. "Relax, everything's fine," he said, his voice soft, almost comforting. As they dined, the conversation became more fluid. Hector was a charming man when he wanted to be, and Lucia began to feel more at ease. She talked to him about her childhood, how she had grown up in the countryside, always working to help her family. Hector listened attentively, as if every word she said was of utmost importance. "You must have been through a lot," he said at one point, his voice laden with an empathy that startled Lucia. "It's not easy to live that kind of life, without support, without anyone to trust." Lucia nodded, feeling a pang of sadness. It was true. Her life had been a constant struggle, and although she wasn't looking for pity, Hector's words touched something deep within her. "It's what I got," she replied with a faint smile. "I don't know if it could have been any different." Hector leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "But maybe it still can be different." Those words made Lucia's heart race. For the first time in years, someone was offering her hope, a possibility that her life could change. But deep down, there was a doubt. Hector was a powerful man, used to getting what he wanted. What if this was all just a game to him? The night ended with a walk under the stars. Hector walked her to her house, and before saying goodbye, he took her hand with a softness that surprised her. "I'd like to see you again, Lucia," he said, his voice low and full of intent. "This is just the beginning." Lucia nodded, unable to speak. Something inside her told her to be careful, but another part, stronger, wanted to believe in him, in the possibility of a different future. As Hector walked away, Lucia felt a mixture of excitement and fear. Her life was about to change, but she couldn't foresee where that change would take her. The morning after meeting Hector dawned with a bright sun, but for Lucia, the day felt wrapped in a haze of uncertainty. She woke up in her small house, her mind still reliving the conversation from the night before. The touch of Hector's hand, his soft words, that unspoken promise that her life could change. It all seemed so unreal. Lucia got up, looking at her reflection in the cracked mirror in her room. Her face showed a mix of exhaustion and a hint of excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. What did all this mean? She wondered as she fixed her hair. Hector was a rich and powerful man. Why would he notice her, a humble woman, practically invisible in that world? The question spun in her mind, but no answer seemed logical. As she got ready to leave for work, she noticed a letter slipped under the door. Picking it up, her heart skipped a beat. It was from Hector. Inside was just a brief message. "See you tonight. Same place." Lucia pressed the note to her chest, feeling a mixture of anticipation and a growing sense of danger. There was something about this situation that didn't sit right, but her desire to believe in the possibility of something more, in the possibility of escaping her monotonous life, was stronger than her caution. The day dragged on slowly in the fields. Lucia worked in the farm's fields while the other workers chatted around her. She couldn't focus. Her mind kept drifting back to Hector. However, something caught her attention. Two women, also farm workers, were whispering to each other, louder than usual. They say Hector was seen with a woman from the village. One of the women, Amalia, commented as she gathered tools. "That doesn't surprise me," the other, Maria, replied. "Did you know his wife, Marta, doesn't even live here? She spends all her time in the city. It's not the first time Hector has had affairs around the farm." Lucia's heart raced when she heard the name Marta. Marta? Wife? Everything she had been pondering over the past few days started to crumble. Lucia froze, as if the world around her had stopped. She knew she had to be discreet, that she couldn't show her surprise. But inside, a storm of emotions was unleashed. Hector was married. Married. "They say Marta doesn't even bother coming here," continued Amalia. "But imagine if she finds out. It would be a scandal." Lucia could no longer listen. She felt the air escaping her, that everything she had believed the night before was nothing but an illusion. However, she had to keep working, stay calm, pretend she hadn't heard anything. That night, when Lucia arrived at the place where Hector had asked to meet her, she was carrying a whirlwind of emotions. She didn't know how she would face what she was feeling. On one hand was the man who had offered her a glimmer of hope, and on the other, the reality that this same man had been hiding a devastating truth. Hector was waiting by his car with that same calm smile that had so disconcerted her at their first meeting. However, this time, Lucia did not return the smile. "Are you okay?" asked Hector, noticing her nervousness. Lucia looked at him intently, not responding immediately. Finally, she took a deep breath and let it all out at once. "Why didn't you tell me you were married?" The words hung in the air like a direct blow, and for a moment, Hector's smile disappeared. His expression tensed, but he quickly tried to smooth over the situation. "Lucia, listen, I was going to tell you. But I didn't want that to interfere with what we have." "What we have," she repeated, incredulous. "What do we have, Hector? Because right now, all I see is a lie." Hector stepped towards her, raising his hands in a calming gesture, but Lucia instinctively stepped back. She felt she could not trust him. All the promises, all the sweet words from the night before, had turned to ashes. "My marriage with Marta is complicated," Hector began to explain. "It's not what you think. It's not a real marriage. We're just together for appearances, for business, and what people will say. There's no love between us. I promise you, Lucia, what I feel for you is real." Lucia listened, but Hector's words felt empty. How could she know if what he was saying was true? Her instinct told her to run, to get away from him, but there was something in those dark eyes that held her back. She didn't want it to be a lie, not after everything she had imagined in those brief days. But the reality of Marta, the invisible yet present wife, hung over them like a dark cloud. "I can't do this," said Lucia, her voice breaking. "I can't be part of this lie." Hector looked at her with an intensity that made her falter. "It's not a lie," he insisted. "I'm not asking you to do anything wrong. What I have with Marta is a formality, but with you, it's different. I need you, Lucia. You're the only one who's made me feel alive in years." Hector's words were like a hook, but Lucia wasn't sure if she should bite. She was torn between the desire to believe him and the feeling that she was being pulled into something she couldn't control. "I don't know if I can trust you, Hector," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "You can," he replied, taking another step towards her. "I will do whatever is necessary to make you trust me. Just give me time. Things between Marta and I will end soon. I promise." Lucia didn't respond. Her mind was full of doubts, but she also knew that part of her wanted to believe there was a way out for both of them, a possibility that Hector would keep his promise. After their tense conversation, Hector drove Lucia back home. During the ride, the silence between them was overwhelming. Lucia stared out the window, watching the lights of houses and fields pass by as her mind tried to process everything. What was she going to do now? When they finally arrived at her house, Hector stopped the car, but before she could get out, he gently took her hand. "Lucia, trust me. Just give me time." She looked at him for a moment, her emotions mixed. Without saying a word, she slowly withdrew her hand from his and got out of the car, feeling the weight of what had just happened. She knew that the decision she made in the next few days would change her life forever. The dawn brought a cold that seeped through the thin walls of Lucia's house, but she didn't feel it. She had spent the night wide awake, staring at the ceiling, as Hector's words and the discovery of his marriage echoed in her head like a constant refrain. Why had he hidden the truth? Why had he made her believe there was a future when another present tied him down? The fatigue was starting to wear on her, but she couldn't stop her mind from running in circles. Hector had asked for time to end things with Marta. Could she trust that? How much time would be enough? The doubts were relentless, but at the same time, there was something else tormenting her, a truth she hadn't yet shared with anyone. A truth that would change everything. She was pregnant. She had been slow to accept it, but the symptoms were clear. Lucia had been feeling strange for weeks, her body changing, her energy depleting faster than usual. The fear she felt was as strong as the hope she had once had. Now, with everything she knew about Hector, the pregnancy was not a source of happiness, but of anxiety. As the sun slowly rose, Lucia sat at the kitchen table, her trembling hands holding a cup of tea she had no intention of drinking. What would she do now? Hector didn't know she was pregnant, and she wasn't sure when or how to tell him. The main question was, should she? She couldn't stop thinking about Marta. What would happen when she found out? And more importantly, what would Hector do when he learned he was going to have a child with her? Lucia closed her eyes, trying to calm herself, but there was no comfort to be found. Her life had become a web of lies and secrets, and now her child's future was tangled in that same chaos. "I can't go on like this," she whispered to herself, placing the cup on the table with a soft clink. "I have to face this. I can't run from the truth." She knew the only way forward was to tell Hector what was happening, even though she didn't know how he would react. But at the very least, he deserved to know. That afternoon, after hours of internal struggle, Lucia made a decision. She would go to Hector's farm and tell him the truth. She couldn't keep this secret any longer. If he really loved her, if his promises were sincere, then he would stand by her, and together they would face the consequences. But if it had all been a lie, Lucia would have to find a way to move on alone. When she reached the entrance of the farm, she saw Hector's car parked near the barn. Her heart pounded as she walked toward the door, but just as she was about to knock, she heard voices inside. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. "You can't keep doing this, Hector." The voice was female, authoritative. It was undoubtedly Marta. Lucia took a step back, her feet light on the gravel path. She knew she shouldn't be listening, but she couldn't stop herself. "I told you, I have everything under control," Hector replied, his voice tense, with a tone Lucia had never heard before. "Under control?" Marta let out a bitter laugh. "Everyone in town is talking. You know I'm not a fool, Hector. I've known about your affairs for years, but this time it's different, isn't it?" Lucia felt the air slowly leave her body. She tensed up. Marta knew. She knew about her. And she was confronting Hector. The sensation of being caught in an invisible web overwhelmed her, but she couldn't move, couldn't walk away. "I'm going to handle everything," Hector said, his voice lower, but full of determination. "Handle everything? How exactly? Do you have a plan?" Marta's voice was sarcastic, challenging. "You know as well as I do that if this comes out, you won't just destroy our marriage, you'll destroy your reputation. And, in case you haven't noticed, your reputation is the only thing keeping you standing in this town." Lucia felt a lump form in her throat. She knew the relationship with Hector wouldn't be easy, but hearing Marta talk about how everything could fall apart terrified her. How could she continue with her pregnancy in the midst of this chaos? Marta continued, not giving Hector a chance to respond. "You're not going to ruin my life for some peasant woman, Hector. Not this time. If you care even a little about what we've built, you'll end this now. You know what you have to do." A heavy silence followed. Lucia felt like the ground was opening beneath her feet. She knew what that meant. Marta was demanding that Hector end things with her. Marta knew everything, and from what Lucia was hearing, Hector was cornered. The door opened abruptly, and Lucia barely had time to step back when Marta stormed out, furious, but without seeing her. Marta walked right past her, too focused on her own anger to notice the young woman just a few feet away. When Marta's figure disappeared among the trees, Lucia felt like she could breathe again, but not for long. Now she had to face Hector. Hector came out moments later, surprised to see Lucia standing in front of his house. "Lucia?" he said, clearly nervous. "What are you doing here?" Lucia felt the words wouldn't come, but she had no more time for doubts. She looked at him directly, her expression a mixture of sadness, determination, and fear. "I heard what Marta told you," she began, her voice trembling but firm. "Hector, I can't keep doing this. Not after everything that's happening. This isn't just about us anymore. It's more complicated, and you know it." He tried to step closer, but Lucia raised a hand, keeping him at a distance. "There's something I need to tell you," she continued, feeling as if each word weighed a ton. I'm pregnant." Hector froze, his face turning pale. The surprise in his eyes was clear, but what followed that surprise was harder to read. There was a mix of emotions, fear, confusion, and even a shadow of concern. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with disbelief. Lucia nodded, her eyes shining with tears she was trying to hold back. "Yes. I found out a few weeks ago, and I didn't know how to tell you. But now, with everything that's going on, I can't keep hiding it." Hector seemed overwhelmed, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, he took a step towards her, but this time his approach wasn't dominant or controlling. It was vulnerable. "Lucia, this changes everything." I didn't know." Hector took a deep breath. "I know I haven't been completely honest with you, but if you're pregnant, then we need to find a solution. I'll do whatever is necessary." Lucia looked at him, unsure if she could trust him. Hector's promises, which once seemed so sweet, now felt empty. Could she really rely on him? "Hector, I don't want to be the cause of destruction. I don't want to be at the center of a scandal. This baby, it's the only thing that matters now." Hector lowered his head, his face showing an internal struggle. He knew Lucia's words were true, but he also knew that any decision he made would have devastating consequences for his life. "I won't abandon you, Lucia," he finally said, looking up. "I promise." Lucia, however, couldn't help but wonder if that promise would be enough. The days following Lucia's confession were an emotional whirlwind. The air was thick with tension and fear. Hector's promise not to abandon her echoed constantly in her mind, but she couldn't stop wondering if he would actually keep it. With each sunrise, the weight of the pregnancy became more tangible, not just in her body, but in the lives of Hector, Marta, and now her own. Lucia had avoided any encounters with Marta since that afternoon, but she knew that the confrontation was inevitable. Marta was a powerful woman, used to maintaining control over her life, and Lucia knew that she wouldn't stand idly by once she learned about the pregnancy. One afternoon, Lucia was called to Hector's farm, but when she arrived, it wasn't him who greeted her, but Marta. She stood beside the old well at the back of the property. She was dressed in a black skirt and a pristine blouse, as always, reflecting the power and coldness that defined her. In contrast, her eyes were two pools of contained fury. "I knew you'd come," Marta said, not bothering to greet her. Her voice was a cold whisper that cut through Lucia like a dagger. "Hector isn't here, and that's for the best. We need to talk, you and I." Lucia swallowed, feeling a knot form in her stomach. She had never been this close to Marta, and the intensity of her presence made Lucia feel small. Even so, she couldn't run. Not after everything that had happened. "What do you want from me, Marta?" Lucia asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though inside she was trembling. Marta looked at her with disdain, as if Lucia was nothing more than a stain on her perfect life. "What I want is simple," Marta replied, walking slowly toward the well. In her hands, she held a thick roll of bills, tightly bound with a rubber band. "I want you to disappear. I want you to remove this mistake from the equation." Lucia took a step back, her eyes fixed on the roll of money. She understood what Marta was implying, but she couldn't believe she would go that far. Her heart raced. "What are you talking about?" Lucia said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "You can't ask me to." "I'm not asking," Marta interrupted, with a cruel glint in her eyes. "I'm ordering. That baby has no place in Hector's life. And neither do you. So this is my offer." Marta stepped closer to the well. With a cold smile on her face, she tossed the roll of bills into the dirty water, which had been stagnant for years. Lucia watched it fall, disappearing into the well as if sinking into oblivion. "Take the money," Marta said, her voice low but threatening. "Do whatever it takes to make sure that baby isn't born. Because believe me, a fatherless child, a child from a peasant like you, has no future in this world. And neither do you." Lucia felt the air grow thick, almost suffocating. The humiliation hit her with an unexpected force, but beyond the insult, what terrified her most was the coldness in Marta's eyes. This woman was willing to do whatever it took to erase her existence and that of her baby. "I won't do it," Lucia whispered, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks. She knew her words, weak as they were, would have no impact on Marta, but she couldn't remain silent. Marta raised an eyebrow, as if she had expected such a predictable response. Then her smile disappeared, and her eyes became sharp, filled with a disdain that made Lucia's heart shrink. "Do you think you have a choice?" Marta replied, her voice cutting. "Hector won't protect you. He's weak, he always has been. Once he realizes there's no way out, he'll leave you. Not because he wants to, but because I'll make him. And you'll be alone, more alone than you've ever been. Lucia felt the tears burning her eyes, but she refused to cry in front of Marta. She wouldn't give her that satisfaction. She clenched her fists and lifted her head, trying to hold on to her dignity, though everything inside her wanted to collapse. "You can't force me to do this," she said, her voice trembling, betraying her fear. "This baby isn't just your problem. It's Hector's too." Marta let out a bitter laugh. "Hector?" she said mockingly. "Hector doesn't know what he wants. I know better than he does. And let me tell you something, Lucia. If you insist on going through with this pregnancy, I will destroy you. I don't care how much it costs. I don't care what I have to do. If you decide to have that baby, I will make sure both of you disappear from Hector's life forever." The air around them grew colder, and Lucia felt the weight of despair creeping in. She knew Marta had the power to make good on her threat, but she also knew she couldn't let herself be intimidated. Her baby wasn't a stain to erase, wasn't a mistake. It was the only light she had in her life. "I'm not afraid of you, Marta," Lucia said, her voice barely a whisper, but filled with a resolve she didn't even know she had. Marta stared at her, her expression hardening. "You should be," she replied, "because you have no idea what I'm capable of." Without another word, Marta turned and walked away slowly, her elegant figure disappearing into the trees. The sound of her heels on the gravel was the only thing that lingered in the air after her departure. Lucia stood there, staring at the well where the money continued to sink into the dirty water. She knew Marta wanted her to retrieve it, to kneel, to humiliate her dignity. But she wouldn't do it. Not for all the money in the world. She had decided to fight, not just for herself, but for her child. Back at her house, Lucia sat at her small table, staring out the window at the horizon, which was beginning to glow orange with the sunset. The conversation with Marta had left her emotionally shattered, but it had also given her something she hadn't expected: clarity. She knew her life wouldn't be easy. She knew Marta wouldn't stop, that Hector would likely be dragged along by his wife's manipulation and power. But she also knew she couldn't abandon her baby. She had been humiliated, scorned, and treated as if her life had no value. But what Marta didn't understand was that Lucia had more strength than anyone could imagine. That night, Lucia looked at herself in the mirror, running a hand over her still flat belly, which held the greatest secret of her life. This baby wouldn't grow up fatherless, but not in the way Marta thought. If Hector chose not to be there, if he chose to give in to his wife's demands, then Lucia would raise her child alone. She didn't need his money, his power. All she needed was her own strength, and she had plenty of that. Hours later, Lucia walked along the dirt road back to her house, her gaze lost in the horizon, her heart still pounding in her chest. The confrontation with Marta had left her emotionally exhausted, but also clearer about her position. She had made a decision. She wouldn't abandon her baby, nor would she allow herself to be intimidated by the Carrasco family's power. Marta had tried to buy her dignity, push her to the edge with a cruel offer, but Lucia wasn't someone who knelt easily. Still, she couldn't ignore the fear. Marta's words kept echoing in her mind. "If you decide to have that baby, I will destroy you." She knew it wasn't an empty threat. Marta was a woman with the resources, power, and influence to make her life a living hell. But Lucia had something Marta couldn't buy: her will. She entered her small house, a modest refuge, but one full of memories and peace. She sat at the table, where the afternoon light softly filtered through the windows. She stared into the void, lost in her thoughts. What would she do now? She knew Hector needed to know what had happened with Marta, but could she really trust him? The next day, Hector came to find Lucia at her house. Lucia had avoided seeing him since the confrontation with Marta, but she knew she couldn't run forever. When she opened the door and saw him, she noticed the worry on his face, as if something had changed in him since the last time they spoke. "Lucia, we need to talk," Hector said, his tone more serious than usual. Lucia stepped back, allowing him to enter. She knew the conversation ahead would be difficult, but she couldn't avoid it any longer. They sat at the table, facing each other, the tension between them palpable. "What's going on?" Lucia asked, though she already had an idea of what was coming. Hector lowered his gaze, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Marta told me. She told me she spoke with you." Lucia nodded slowly, watching Hector's face for any signs of support or resistance. "Did she tell you what she asked me?" Lucia asked, unable to hide the pain in her voice. Hector looked up, his dark eyes reflecting confusion and remorse. What Marta did was unacceptable, Hector admitted, though his tone revealed the internal struggle he was facing. "I can't justify what she said to you, but you have to understand that she's scared, Lucia. She's worried about what this could mean for our life, for our reputation." Lucia felt a pang of frustration and pain at his words. Reputation. That was what always seemed to matter to Marta and Hector. Their worlds revolved around appearances, while she fought for her reality, for the life of her child. "And what about me?" Lucia replied, her voice trembling but firm. "What about my life, about this baby? What does it mean to you?" Hector looked at her, visibly caught between two worlds. He knew he couldn't abandon Lucia, but he also understood the devastating consequences if everything came to light. "Lucia, I don't want you to suffer any more than you already have," he said softly. "I'm here to support you. No matter what Marta says, I won't leave you alone. But you also have to understand that there are things that can't be easily resolved. My marriage to Marta, it's complicated, but I can't let this destroy everything." Lucia looked at him, feeling her heart break bit by bit. Hector remained trapped in his privileged world, unable to choose a clear path. He wanted to protect himself, to keep his secrets and his life intact, while she faced the consequences. "Is that all this is to you, Hector?" Lucia asked, her eyes filling with tears she didn't want to shed. "Is this just an inconvenience you need to handle? How do you think I feel, hearing that my child is seen as a mistake, as something that could ruin your reputation?" Hector stayed silent, unable to respond. Lucia stood up from the table, stepping away from him, breathing deeply to keep her emotions in check. She knew he wouldn't understand. Not fully. Hector was a man trapped in his own world, between the life he had built with Marta and the feelings he had for her, a woman who didn't fit into that mold. "I don't want your money, Hector," Lucia said, without turning around. "I don't want you to help me fix this as if it's a problem. I want you to recognize that this baby isn't a mistake. It's a life. And I'm not going to give up." That same afternoon, as Lucia tried to compose herself after the conversation with Hector, she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found Amalia, one of the women who worked on the farm. Her situation had become the talk of the town. Rumors spread quickly, and people were starting to whisper about the scandal involving Hector and the poor girl caught in the middle. Amalia, a sturdy woman with a strong personality, looked at Lucia with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Can I come in?" she asked, though it didn't seem like she was expecting a refusal. Lucia nodded and let her in. Amalia sat down in a chair, crossing her arms over her chest. "Listen, Lucia, I've heard what people are saying," Amalia began, her tone direct. "And it's not pretty. They're saying Marta's been following you, that she's determined to make you leave town." Lucia felt her heart tighten. She knew Marta wouldn't give up easily, but hearing it from someone else only made the fear grow inside her. "It doesn't surprise me," Lucia responded with a sigh. "She's not going to let Hector help me. Not me or my child." Amalia watched her for a moment, her gaze intense. Then, without warning, she leaned forward and spoke in a lower, almost conspiratorial tone. "Listen, girl, I don't know what's going to happen with Hector, but if you want that baby to be born and grow up in peace, you have to be stronger than her. Marta is a dangerous woman, and if you stay here waiting for things to fix themselves, you're going to regret it. You can't rely on Hector to save you." Lucia looked at Amalia in surprise. A woman who had always kept a professional distance was now giving her advice that sounded more like a warning. She knew Amalia was right. She couldn't wait for Hector to stand up to Marta for her. She would have to protect herself and her child. "Thank you," Lucia said, feeling a surge of gratitude toward the woman who had dared to tell her the truth. "I'll do whatever it takes." Amalia nodded and stood up to leave. But before walking out, she stopped at the door and looked at Lucia one last time. "Remember, Lucia, this baby is yours. No one else has the right to decide its fate. Don't let them take that away from you." That night, Lucia stayed awake, contemplating her future. She knew she couldn't keep waiting for things to get better on their own. Marta was determined to destroy her, and Hector was too trapped in his own world to act. She couldn't stay in the village, surrounded by rumors and threats. As the moon dimly lit the room, Lucia decided she had to leave. She didn't know where, but she had to find a place where she could raise her child without the shadow of the Carrascos looming over her. She knew it would be hard, but she also knew the life she was living was no longer an option. Marta would never leave her alone, and Hector, though full of good intentions, wasn't capable of saving her from that reality. She would take her fate into her own hands. It was time to start over, far from the lies and pain. Lucia stayed awake through the night, her thoughts spinning endlessly. The conversation with Hector had made it clear that, although he felt something for her, he was still trapped by his own fear of scandal and loyalty to a life of appearances. On the other hand, Amelia's words echoed in her mind. "This baby is yours. No one else has the right to decide its fate." Lucia had made a decision. She couldn't stay in the village, where Marta's shadow and Hector's control were crushing her. She had to leave, to find a place where she could start over, raise her child away from the toxicity surrounding her. The early morning silence was deep when Lucia got out of bed, taking only the essentials, a small bag with some clothes and the few savings she had managed to keep from years of work on the farm. She knew that leaving in the middle of the night, without telling Hector, would be a hard blow for him, but she also knew she couldn't wait any longer. It wasn't just her life at stake, but her child's as well. As she walked along the dirt road, every step felt like a mix of relief and pain. Leaving the village behind meant saying goodbye to the few good memories she had made, but it also meant freeing herself from a life of humiliation and fear. She knew that if she stayed, Marta would find a way to destroy her, and Hector, despite his promises, wouldn't have the strength to truly protect her. When she reached the outskirts of the farm, Lucia stopped for a moment, looking at the house in the distance. The lights were off, and everything seemed asleep. For a moment, a wave of nostalgia washed over her. Part of her wished things had been different, that Hector had had the courage to choose her, to fight for them. But the reality was that he was too tied to Marta and the world they had built together. "Goodbye, Hector," Lucia whispered, more to herself than to him. The cold wind of the early morning wrapped around her as she continued on her way. The decision was made. She was leaving. But the sadness of leaving behind everything she knew wouldn't leave her easily. Hours later, as the sun began to timidly rise over the horizon, Lucia walked along the dusty road, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. Fatigue was starting to weigh on her body, but she wouldn't stop. She couldn't stop. In the distance, she heard the sound of an engine approaching. Looking back, she saw an old truck coming slowly toward her. She recognized the vehicle immediately, Amalia. The woman had left early, as always, heading to the farm. Lucia thought about hiding, avoiding another uncomfortable conversation, but she knew she couldn't run from everything. The truck pulled up beside her, and Amalia rolled down the window, her face showing surprise and concern. "Where do you think you're going at this hour?" Amalia asked, though her tone was softer than usual. Lucia looked down, aware that her decision was drastic, but she couldn't turn back now. "I'm leaving, Amalia. I can't stay here anymore. Not with everything that's happening." Amalia studied her for a moment, as if evaluating the situation. "And you're walking?" she asked, a mix of disbelief and concern in her voice. "Where are you going?" Lucia shook her head. She didn't have a clear destination, she just knew she had to get away from that place. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just know I can't stay here. I can't keep living in fear, waiting for Hector to make a decision he's never going to make." Amalia sighed and turned off the truck's engine. Then she opened the door and got out, walking toward Lucia with firm but careful steps. "Get in," she said in her usual practical and direct tone. "You can't be out here alone, especially in your condition." Lucia hesitated for a moment, but Amalia's voice made sense. She was tired, vulnerable, and the weight of the baby in her belly reminded her that she could no longer think only of herself. She got into the truck in silence, and as Amalia started the engine again, Lucia looked out the window, watching as the last shadows of her old life faded into the distance. The drive was quiet, with only the sound of the engine and the wind accompanying them. Amalia wasn't a woman of many words, but her presence brought a sense of safety. Finally, after a few miles of silence, Amalia spoke. "I know you're doing what you think is best," she said, without taking her eyes off the road. "And maybe it is. But you can't do this alone, Lucia." "Not now." Lucia nodded, understanding what Amalia meant. She knew the road ahead would be tough, that she couldn't rely solely on her own strength. But she also knew that staying meant continuing in an emotional and physical trap that wouldn't allow her to raise her child freely. "Do you have anywhere to go?" Amalia asked in a practical tone. Lucia shook her head. She had left without a plan, driven only by the urgent need to escape. "No," she admitted. "I have no one." Amalia was silent for a moment. Then, with a determined gesture, she turned onto a different road. "I know someone who can help you," she said. "A cousin of mine lives in another town, not far from here. She runs a small boarding house and could offer you a place to stay until you get back on your feet. It's not much, but it's a start." Lucia looked at her, surprised and grateful. She hadn't expected to receive help, let alone from someone like Amalia, who had always kept an emotional distance. Yet, at that moment, it was exactly what she needed. "I don't know how to thank you," Lucia said, her voice breaking. Amalia gave a small, barely noticeable smile. "You don't need to thank me. Just make sure no one ever makes you feel like you're worth nothing. Not Marta, not Hector, and certainly not this damn town." Lucia remained silent, processing Amalia's words. She knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least now she had a direction. A possibility. By late afternoon, Amalia dropped Lucia off at her cousin Clara's boarding house, where she was welcomed without too many questions by a stout, kind-hearted woman. The place was modest but cozy, and as Lucia settled into her small room, she felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. She had left behind her home, Hector, and everything she knew, but she had also gained something more important: freedom. That night, as she rested in a bed that wasn't hers, but offered her a temporary peace, Lucia caressed her belly. She still didn't know what the future held, but at least she knew she was doing the right thing for her child. The days at Clara's boarding house passed with a strange calm. Lucia woke up early, helped with daily chores, and at night, lay in her small room, trying to find peace in her new reality. Though fear lingered, like a shadow following her, she felt that for the first time in weeks, she could breathe. Clara was a direct woman but kind. She accepted Lucia without many questions, though it was clear she knew more than she let on. Amalia must have told her something, enough for Clara to understand that Lucia needed space, both physically and emotionally. The baby was starting to move more frequently, and that sensation, despite the difficult circumstances, gave Lucia a glimmer of hope. Though she had left behind her life in the village, and though she knew Marta still loomed as a latent threat, she now had something invaluable: the possibility of a future for her child. The town where the boarding house was located was small, much smaller than the one she had fled. Despite that, the people were kind, and Lucia felt a sense of anonymity that brought her unexpected comfort. No one knew her here, no one knew about her past or the secrets that haunted her. It was a new opportunity to reinvent herself. One afternoon, while helping Clara organize some rooms, the conversation inevitably turned to her situation. Clara, with her usual discretion, waited until they were both seated in the kitchen, sipping tea, before speaking. "Amalia told me a little about what brought you here," Clara said, without taking her eyes off her cup. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, but I want you to know that this is a safe place. No one is going to come looking for you here." Lucia, who had kept her emotions in check since her arrival, felt a lump form in her throat as she heard those words. Safe? Was that possible? Could she really find peace here, away from Marta and Hector? "I'm not sure I'm truly safe," Lucia said after a long pause. "Marta, she's a powerful woman. And Hector, he's torn between what he feels for me and what she demands of him." Clara nodded, her expression calm, but her eyes showed understanding. "I see. I've known men like Hector before. Men caught between what they want and what society expects of them. But, Lucia, you can't live your life waiting for someone else to decide your fate. You've already made the most important decision. You left everything you knew behind to protect your child. That's true strength." Lucia looked at Clara, surprised. The simplicity of her words, yet the wisdom they held, stirred something inside her. She had been running from the pain and fear, but perhaps she had also been running from herself, from facing the reality that her life had already changed and would never be the same again. "I don't know if I'm as strong as you think," Lucia admitted, her voice trembling. "I feel broken, like everything I've done isn't enough." Clara took a sip of tea, letting her words sink in. "Strength isn't measured by how you feel right now, but by what you choose to do with those feelings. You've chosen to protect your child, and that's more than many would do. Don't let Marta's fear or Hector's steal away what you've earned." Despite Clara's advice and the sense of relative safety the boarding house provided, Lucia couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. One afternoon, while walking around the outskirts of town, gathering herbs for Clara's garden, she saw a figure in the distance that she instantly recognized. Hector. Her heart skipped a beat. He hadn't seen her yet, but the fear and surprise paralyzed her. How had Hector found this place? Had he come alone? Was Marta behind this? Lucia watched from a distance, hidden among the trees. Hector looked exhausted, as if the weight of the decisions he hadn't made was crushing him. She couldn't decide whether to confront him or keep hiding. Part of her wanted to run to him, to ask him to leave, to let her be. But another part, one she didn't want to admit, still loved him, despite everything. Hector began walking down the main street, asking some neighbors. Lucia watched as people's gestures seemed to indicate they didn't know him, that no one gave him information. But Hector was persistent, and Lucia knew that sooner or later, someone would point him toward the inn. Lucia hurried back to the inn, her heart pounding. Clara saw her come in, agitated, and without needing words, she understood what was happening. "He's here, isn't he?" Clara asked firmly. Lucia nodded, trying to calm herself. "I don't know what to do. I don't want to see him. I can't go back to that life, Clara. Marta, if he's here, it's only a matter of time before she finds me too." Clara walked up to Lucia and looked her straight in the eyes, her voice calm but firm. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to, Lucia. If you don't want to see him, I'll make him leave. But if there's something you still need to say to him, this could be your chance to close that chapter of your life." Lucia took a deep breath, feeling the storm of emotions in her chest. Could she face Hector after everything that had happened? Or would it be better to let it all fade, for him to return to his life and for her to move on with hers? Hector arrived at the inn by late afternoon. Clara intercepted him before he could reach the front door, stopping him with a raised hand. "What are you looking for here?" Clara asked, her tone firm. Hector, visibly exhausted, looked around, as if expecting Lucia to appear at any moment. "I'm looking for Lucia," he replied, his voice heavy with desperation. "I know she's here. Please, I need to talk to her." Clara studied him for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Lucia doesn't want to see you. You have nothing left to say to her. You should leave." Hector seemed taken aback by the harshness in Clara's words, but he didn't move. "I can't leave without speaking to her," he insisted. "Not until I know she's okay." Clara looked at him sternly, but before she could respond, Lucia appeared at the door, her face tense but determined. "Let him, Clara," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I'll talk to him." Clara nodded and stepped back, leaving them alone on the porch of the inn. Lucia looked at Hector, feeling a mixture of love and disappointment inside. He had been everything to her once, but now she saw clearly the chains that bound him. He was no longer the man she needed in her life. "You didn't have to come," Lucia said, breaking the silence. "We're not part of the same story anymore, Hector." He looked at her, visibly distressed. "Lucia, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know how to handle it all. But I need you. I can't go on without you." Lucia watched him, and though his words touched her, she also knew she couldn't go back. "It's not that simple," she replied softly but firmly. "What you need isn't what I need anymore. I chose something different. I chose to protect my child. And that means staying away from you, and from everything that kept me trapped." Hector tried to step closer, but Lucia raised her hand, stopping him. "You can't save me, Hector. Not me, and not this baby. Only I can do that. And I'm already doing it." Hector lowered his head, defeated. He knew he had lost something he could never get back. "Goodbye, Hector," Lucia said, with quiet sadness. "Now I have to move on." The days after her meeting with Tomas brought Lucia a mixture of anxiety and determination. Now she knew she wasn't alone, that there was a way to stand up to Marta, but fear still lingered in her chest. Marta wasn't someone who would give up easily, and Lucia knew the confrontation would be inevitable. However, the support of Clara and Tomas had sparked something in her. For the first time in a long while, she felt ready to fight, not just for herself, but for her child's future. One morning, while Lucia was helping Clara in the garden, the sound of a car approaching down the road made her stop in her tracks. Clara looked up, frowning. "Are you expecting someone?" Clara asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Lucia shook her head, her heart racing. She had feared this moment since the day she received Marta's letter. She knew that sooner or later, Marta or her people would find her again. As both women walked toward the entrance, the car stopped, and as Lucia feared, Marta stepped out of the vehicle, impeccably dressed, with an expression of absolute coldness on her face. "She's here," Lucia whispered, feeling the fear grip her body, but Clara gently took her arm. "Breathe. Don't let her intimidate you," Clara said quietly. "You're not alone." Lucia nodded, taking a deep breath. She had to be strong. Marta walked toward them with determined steps, as if the entire world around her was under her control. She didn't greet them, didn't show any courtesy. Her gaze fixed directly on Lucia, like a hunter eyeing her prey. "You thought you could hide from me," Marta said, her voice low but laced with menace. "But no one escapes me, Lucia. No one." Lucia held her head high, but inside she felt the weight of every word. She knew Marta was used to everyone bending to her will, but this time, things would be different. "I'm not running from you," Lucia responded, her voice firm, surprising even herself. "I'm protecting my child. Something you can't understand." Marta let out a bitter laugh, as if Lucia's words held no value for her. "Your child," Marta repeated with disdain. "That baby has no place in Hector's life. Do you really think he'll stand by your side when all of this is over? Hector is a weak man. He always has been. If you go through with this, you'll be left alone, with a child that will never be acknowledged." Lucia felt Marta's words like daggers, but she couldn't allow herself to falter. She had come too far to turn back now. "I don't need Hector to acknowledge me," Lucia replied, her eyes burning with months of contained fury. "This baby is my life, and I will fight for him. You don't have the right to decide who deserves to live or not. I'm not going to disappear, Marta. I won't let you destroy me." Marta narrowed her eyes, her face hardening. "You know I can make your life impossible, right?" she said in a lower, threatening tone. "If you choose to continue, your life will be hell. Not just for you, but for that child too. I'll make you regret ever challenging a Carrasco." Clara, who had been observing in silence until that moment, stepped forward, positioning herself next to Lucia. "That's enough, Marta," Clara said firmly. "You can't keep intimidating Lucia like this. We all know who you are and what you're capable of, but you can't control everything. Lucia has the right to make her own decisions for herself and for her child. If you think you're powerful enough to destroy someone's life, you'll soon find out that you're not above the law. Marta looked at Clara with disdain, but the fact that Clara spoke with such confidence made a slight shadow of doubt cross Marta's eyes. "And what are you going to do, Clara?" Marta asked, her tone dripping with arrogance. "Fight me? You know you don't stand a chance. My money, my contacts, they can't be beaten by simple threats." Clara smiled slightly, a gesture that contrasted with the tension of the moment. "It's not me you should fear, Marta. It's the law. And Lucia isn't alone. She has a lawyer ready to defend her, and believe me, it won't be easy for you to silence us." Marta frowned, clearly surprised. She hadn't expected Lucia to take legal action. To her, Lucia was a woman with no resources or support, a peasant who should bow to her will. But the revelation that Lucia was prepared to fight in court had altered Marta's perception of the situation. "A lawyer," Marta murmured, trying to regain her composure. "What kind of lawyer is going to stand against me?" Lucia stepped forward, her voice clear and firm. "A lawyer who knows what you're doing, Marta. Who understands how you manipulate people to get what you want. And who's ready to expose everything you're capable of doing so the world can see who you really are." For a moment, Marta seemed to waver. Her eyes darkened, and her jaw tightened. She knew a legal battle wasn't what she had planned. Marta was used to solving her problems privately, where she could control everything. But this time, something was different. Lucia wasn't the same woman she had humiliated weeks ago. This Lucia was ready to fight. "This isn't over, Lucia," Marta said, her voice full of venom. "Maybe you think you can challenge me, but I always win. Always." With those words, Marta turned and walked back to her car, her tall, cold figure disappearing into the distance as the vehicle started and drove away. When Marta's silhouette vanished, Lucia felt her body, tense from the confrontation, begin to relax slowly. Back at the boarding house, Clara made tea for both of them, and they sat in the kitchen, the silence between them filled with a shared understanding. "You did well," Clara finally said, breaking the silence. "Marta didn't expect you to respond that way." It threw her off. Lucia took a sip of tea, feeling the tension slowly melt away. She knew the battle wasn't over, but standing up to Marta and not backing down had been a huge step forward. "I felt stronger than I thought," Lucia admitted, looking at the steam rising from her cup. "But I'm still scared. Marta isn't going to stop. You know that, right?" Clara nodded, her expression serious. "I know. But the important thing is that you won't stop either. You have Tomas on your side, and now Marta knows she can't act without consequences. The law can be on your side, Lucia. And that's something Marta can never control." Lucia nodded slowly, processing everything that had happened. She knew the fight would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. She had found a strength she didn't know she had, and she knew that no matter what, she would keep going for her child. The courthouse was a modest building, but to Lucia, it seemed imposing as she walked toward it. The gray stone facade, the heavy wooden doors, everything seemed designed to intimidate those who passed through. Lucia held her head high as she entered, with Clara and Tomas by her side. As she crossed the room, she saw Marta already seated beside her lawyer. Marta was as impeccable as ever, her face cold, her posture rigid. She didn't look directly at Lucia, but Lucia could feel the force of her presence. However, what really caught Lucia's attention was the figure of Hector, sitting on the other side of the room, head bowed, visibly tense. He didn't look at her either. The judge called the parties, and the hearing began. Tomas was the first to speak, presenting Lucia's situation with a clarity and conviction that reassured her. He laid out the facts. Lucia was expecting a child, the result of her relationship with Hector, and Marta had tried to manipulate and harass Lucia into disappearing. The messages, the threats, and Marta's actions to destroy Lucia's life were exposed. Throughout Tomas' testimony, Lucia occasionally glanced at Hector, hoping for some sign of support. He looked defeated, trapped in his own internal conflict. Marta, for her part, maintained an impassive expression, though Lucia noticed her fingers drumming nervously on the table, as if her usual control was beginning to crack. "Your Honor, what we see here is a clear abuse of power," Tomas continued. "My client is not only being harassed by Marta Carrasco, but she has also been extorted into abandoning her child. This is a blatant attempt to silence a woman who has the right to decide for herself and to fight for the well-being of her future child." The judge nodded slowly, taking notes. When it was Marta's lawyer's turn, he tried to divert attention, portraying Lucia as an opportunist. However, the evidence Tomas had presented, the messages and Marta's actions, was undeniable. The pressure was starting to show on Marta's face, her usual composure threatened. When it was Lucia's turn to testify, her heart was pounding, but her mind was clear. Tomas had warned her that Marta's lawyer would try to attack her, make her look weak or manipulative. But Lucia knew the truth, and that truth was her greatest weapon. "Lucia, tell us, how has this experience been for you?" Tomas asked, his voice calm and encouraging. Lucia took a breath, searching within herself for the strength she had cultivated over the months. "It's been hard," she admitted, looking at the judge. "I came here hoping to start fresh, thinking I had found something good. But everything turned into a nightmare when Marta started threatening me. She told me my child had no right to be born, that I had no right to stay. She tried to humiliate me, make me feel insignificant. But this baby," Lucia placed a hand on her belly, "this baby is everything to me, and I won't let anyone take him or destroy him." The room was utterly silent. Marta shifted in her seat, and Lucia could see the restrained fury in her face. Marta's lawyer tried to attack Lucia's credibility, suggesting that this was all an attempt to take advantage of Hector's fortune. But Lucia stood firm. "I'm not here for money," Lucia responded calmly. "I'm here because I want my child to have a dignified life. I'm here because I don't want to live in fear anymore." When it was Hector's turn to testify, the tension in the room spiked. Everyone was waiting for his reaction. Lucia looked at him, her heart in her throat. She knew Hector had been torn, trapped between his loyalty to Marta and what he felt for Lucia. But this was the moment where he would have to make a choice. Hector slowly stood up, walking to the stand with a defeated expression. His eyes finally met Lucia's, and she saw the pain and guilt reflected in them. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," Hector began, his voice low but clear. "I fell in love with Lucia, that's true. But I never thought about the consequences. I know I made mistakes, big mistakes. And I know I should have defended Lucia from the start. What Marta has done is wrong. And I can't keep letting this go on. I acknowledge this child is mine, and I will do whatever is necessary to ensure his well-being." Hector's words fell over the room like a thunderclap. Marta shot up from her seat, her face contorted with fury. "You can't do this, Hector," she shouted, her anger shattering her cold facade. "You can't ruin our life for a peasant." The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but Marta was out of control. Lucia watched, with a mix of awe and sadness, as the woman who had controlled everything around her for so long began to unravel. "This isn't about you, Marta," Hector said with a firmness Lucia hadn't expected. "This is about doing what's right. I've let this go on for too long. I can't do it anymore." Silence fell over the room once more as Marta was escorted out of the courtroom. Hector returned to his seat, and though no words were exchanged, Lucia felt that, for the first time, Hector had done something that truly mattered. The judge ruled in Lucia's favor, granting her full legal protection against any attempts by Marta to interfere in her life. Additionally, the judge set terms for Hector to fulfill his responsibilities as a father. Lucia had won the battle, but beyond the legal victory, she had gained something even more important, her freedom. As they left the courtroom, Clara hugged Lucia with a proud smile. "You did it," Clara said. "You faced your storm and won." Lucia smiled, feeling genuine peace for the first time in a long while. She had walked through the darkness, and although the future remained uncertain, she knew that what awaited her now was a new beginning, a future where her child could grow free from fear. 5 years after that day in court, Lucia walked confidently through the halls of a different courthouse. The marble walls and dark wooden doors were imposing, but they no longer intimidated her. This time, she was not the frightened woman struggling to survive in a world where the power and influence of others dictated her fate. Today, Lucia was not only at peace with her past, but she had also found purpose in her fight. Lucia Gomez, now known as Judge Lucia Gomez, had become a symbol of resilience in her community. After her victory in court against Marta and Hector, Lucia had decided not only to defend her life and that of her son, but also to use her experience to help other women who, like her, were facing abuse of power, manipulation, and injustice. Years of study, effort, and sacrifice had led her to obtain her law degree and, eventually, to be appointed as a judge. Lucia's life was now a testament to what a woman can achieve when she refuses to be intimidated by her circumstances. She was no longer the peasant woman everyone underestimated. She was a powerful woman who knew the law and used it to protect those who could not protect themselves. Lucia's journey had not been easy, but she had never been alone. From the moment her son, Diego, was born, everything she had done had been for him. Her little boy had come into the world amidst emotional and legal storms, but his arrival was the light that guided Lucia toward a better future. While others saw her son as an obstacle, Lucia saw him as her reason to keep fighting. Raising Diego had not been an easy task, but Lucia had discovered that she didn't need a man to move forward. Although Hector had fulfilled his legal obligations, he had never been a constant presence in Diego's life. Lucia didn't need him. From day one, she had set out to raise her son with love, respect, and the firm belief that they could face any challenge together. Clara, who had always been by her side, became Diego's adopted grandmother, offering emotional and familial support when Lucia needed it most. Diego grew up surrounded by love and care, and as Lucia built her career, she made sure he knew that although the road wouldn't always be easy, they could achieve anything if they stuck together. The sound of the courtroom door opening snapped Lucia out of her thoughts. Today, she had a case that reminded her a lot of her own past, a young mother fighting against a powerful family trying to take everything from her. The woman's story resonated deeply with Lucia, and she knew she had to make sure that, this time, justice was on the right side. Lucia watched as the young woman, nervous and fragile, entered the courtroom. Her eyes reflected the fear Lucia herself had felt years ago. She recognized herself in that gaze, but she also saw something more, a determination that reminded her of who she had been. She knew that this trial would not only be important for the woman who was being mistreated, but also for everyone facing similar struggles who needed to see that justice could prevail, even when power was against them. The opposing lawyer, an arrogant man clearly used to winning, stood up to make his case, but Lucia, from her seat on the bench, kept a calm expression, waiting patiently. She had learned not to be intimidated by appearances or status. Now, she had the authority, and her duty was to ensure that power did not crush the weak. When it was the woman's turn, her lawyer presented a solid case, but Lucia also intervened, asking precise questions that dismantled the opposing narrative. The law was on her side, and Lucia knew how to use it. The verdict, in the end, was clear. The young mother won, and the powerful family was forced to back down. As Lucia left the courtroom that day, she felt a deep peace. She had come a long way from that moment when she had fled from Marta's control, desperately searching for a safe place for herself and her son. Her life was now marked by her ability to help others find the justice she had fought so hard to achieve. As she walked toward her car, a small hand tugged on her coat. It was Diego, now 5 years old, with a bright smile that always lit up her day. "Did you win today, Mom?" Diego asked, his eyes filled with curiosity. Lucia smiled, kneeling down to his level. "Yes, sweetheart, I did. But more than that, today I helped someone get their life back. And that's what really matters." Diego hugged her, and Lucia lifted him into her arms. As she held him, she looked at the horizon, knowing that the future she had dreamed of for them was becoming more real every day. She was no longer afraid. She had proven that she didn't need a man to move forward, nor to be strong. Her strength came from within, from her love for her son and her desire to make the world a better place for him. Over the years, Lucia continued to serve as a judge, earning recognition not only for her legal skill, but also for her compassion. She became a respected figure in the community, a woman who had not only survived adversity, but had thrived despite it. Women in difficult situations came to her for advice and support, and Lucia never turned them away. Her story became a symbol of hope for those who thought they had no way out. Lucia knew that life had placed obstacles in her path, but it had also given her the strength to overcome them. It hadn't been easy, but she had managed to build a life for herself and her son, a life free from fear and full of purpose. As she walked home, holding Diego's hand, Lucia reflected on how far she had come. She knew that her story was just one among many, but she also knew that, in the end, the true victory hadn't been over Marta or Hector. Her true victory had been over fear, and that was a battle she had won completely. If you enjoyed this story, I invite you to leave a comment sharing what you felt while listening, and if you've been through a similar situation of deceit, I'd love to hear your valuable opinion. I would be honored if you leave a like, share the video with a friend or family member, and subscribe to the channel. Don't miss the next surprising story that's popping up on your screen right now. We have entertainment guaranteed just for you. See you in the next video.